The sun rose over the desert city like any other morning. The streets outside the U.S. diplomatic compound bustled with local vendors setting up stalls, children rushing to school, and embassy workers passing through security gates with their badges clipped to their suits. Inside the compound, American and foreign staff prepared for another long day of paperwork, consular interviews, and diplomatic meetings. It was a rhythm of routine, one that offered comfort in its predictability. But that morning, normalcy was shattered in less than 5 minutes. At 9:17 a.m., the sound of gunfire echoed down the street. At first, those inside thought it was distant, perhaps a military drill or celebratory gunshots, as sometimes happened in the region. But the sound grew louder, sharper, unmistakably hostile. Embassy security cameras caught the first images. A convoy of black trucks barreling down the avenue, their beds filled with armed men. They wore mismatched uniforms, some with masks pulled over their faces, others carrying rocket-propelled grenades on their shoulders. The security gates clanged shut, alarms blared across the compound, and guards rushed into position. But the attackers moved with terrifying speed. In coordinated fashion, they fired RPGs at the outer walls, blowing open sections of concrete and forcing back the defenders. Civilians inside screamed as glass shattered and smoke filled the air. Within minutes, the compound that once stood as a symbol of international cooperation had become a battlefield. By 9:23 a.m., the terrorists had breached the gates. Security forces inside the embassy fought bravely, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Witnesses later recalled hearing bursts of automatic fire ricocheting off the marble floors as employees scrambled for cover. Some diplomats and staff locked themselves inside safe rooms, frantically calling Washington for help. Others were caught in open corridors, forced to their knees as masked gunmen stormed through offices, shouting in a language most hostages didn't understand. The terrorists moved with chilling precision. They separated military personnel from civilians, men from women, and marched them into the central hall of the embassy complex. Some resisted. One security guard was shot in cold blood, his body left on the marble floor as a warning to the rest. The silence that followed was suffocating. Nearly 200 people, Americans, foreign diplomats, aid workers, and even local staff, were now at the mercy of a ruthless group whose motives were not yet clear. At 9:40 a.m., the leader of the attackers appeared. Dressed in black fatigues, his face uncovered, he exuded the kind of controlled anger that sent chills through the air. In his hand, he carried a satellite phone. He stood before the hostages and announced in heavily accented English, "The world will hear us. America will bow. If our demands are not met, you will all die." His words spread like wildfire across global news outlets. Within an hour, a video of terrified hostages kneeling under the barrels of rifles appeared online. The terrorists demanded the release of prisoners held in U.S. custody overseas, as well as the withdrawal of American forces from key regions. The ultimatum came with a brutal countdown 24 hours before executions would begin. In Washington, chaos erupted. The National Security Council convened an emergency meeting in the Situation Room, where generals, intelligence officers, and political advisors argued over possible responses. Negotiation channels were opened, but progress was slim. Every intelligence briefing painted the same grim picture. The compound was rigged with explosives, the hostages surrounded by heavily armed fighters, and the terrorists willing to die for their cause. A direct assault, some warned, could lead to a massacre. For the families watching the news back home, the horror was unbearable. Mothers clutched photographs of their children, fathers begged reporters for answers, and children asked when their parents would come home. Live broadcasts captured their grief, fueling public outrage and demands for government action. Bring them back alive. One sign read at a protest outside the White House. Inside the embassy compound, fear gnawed at every hostage. They were denied food and water, forced to sit on the cold floor for hours as armed guards watched their every move. Some prayed silently. Others tried to comfort those who sobbed uncontrollably. The walls that once displayed flags and portraits of leaders now echoed with threats and cries of despair. Every second stretched into eternity. But even in the darkest corners, small sparks of resilience remained. A nurse quietly tended to the wounded, tearing strips of fabric to bandage bleeding arms. An elderly diplomat whispered encouragement to the younger staff, telling them not to lose hope. And one Marine, though disarmed and battered, whispered to his colleagues that the U.S. military never left its people behind. Far away, in a U.S. airbase across the region, soldiers sat glued to live intelligence feeds. Grainy drone footage showed the compound's rooftops crawling with armed guards and the faint outlines of terrified hostages herded inside. One name soon surfaced in every tactical briefing: Operation Iron Shield, a code name for a possible rescue mission. Risky, near impossible, but maybe, just maybe, the only chance to save the lives inside. The operation required precision, bravery, and someone who could lead from above with unmatched skill. In that moment, amidst the frantic planning and heated arguments, a decorated pilot's name appeared on the shortlist. She had flown countless missions in war zones, pulled soldiers from certain death, and earned respect in the skies. Yet many in the room hesitated. Was it too dangerous, too unpredictable, even for her? As the debate raged, time slipped away. The terrorists released another video of trembling hostages, a gun pressed to a young diplomat's temple, demanding their voices be heard by the world. The clock was ticking, and the U.S. knew that hesitation could mean slaughter. For the 200 men, women, and children trapped inside the embassy, survival was no longer guaranteed. Their lives now balanced on the edge of politics, strategy, and courage. Outside, the world watched with bated breath, waiting to see if America could summon the strength to pull off the impossible. The stage was set. The crisis had begun. The crisis was no longer confined to the compound walls. It had exploded across the globe. By noon, every major news channel ran non-stop coverage of the hostage standoff. Images of blindfolded Americans kneeling under rifles replayed endlessly, accompanied by grim headlines: 200 lives in peril. Anchors speculated on motives. Experts debated strategy, and retired generals argued over whether negotiation or force was the answer. In Washington, the White House had become a hive of controlled chaos. The president convened his top advisors in the Situation Room, where the air was thick with tension. A giant screen displayed live drone footage of the compound. Tiny black figures moved across rooftops. The hostages huddled in the main hall appeared as motionless dots. The silence in the room was punctuated only by the steady ticking of the clock. "Mr. President," the National Security Advisor said gravely, "we are facing a stalemate. Their demands are non-negotiable, and intelligence confirms the compound is wired with explosives. If they detonate..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. The room understood. The president leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly. He was a man known for his calm under fire, but the strain showed in his eyes. "What are our options?" A general spoke up, his voice steady but grim. "Sir, we can attempt negotiations through intermediaries, but it's unlikely to succeed. We can also prepare a rescue operation. High risk, but it may be our only shot at saving them." The Secretary of State cut in sharply. "If we storm the compound, they'll kill the hostages. You'll be sending those people to their graves." The room erupted into debate. Voices clashed: military urgency against diplomatic caution, emotion against logic. Outside, Protesters gathered at the gates of the White House, waving signs and chanting for action. Families of the hostages appeared on live television, their pleas heartbreaking. One mother, clutching a framed photograph of her teenage daughter, begged through tears, "Please, bring her home. Don't let her die there." Meanwhile, in the compound, the situation worsened. Hostages were denied food and water, their bodies weakening by the hour. Armed guards prowled the hallways, their eyes cold and unblinking. Some of the younger hostages trembled uncontrollably, their whispers silenced by rifle butts striking the floor. The leader of the terrorists, known only as Khalid, made periodic appearances, reminding everyone of the deadline. His threats were chillingly calm, spoken as though execution were a matter of routine. At 3 p.m., Khalid made good on his promise to escalate. A video appeared online showing a hostage being dragged to his knees, a knife at his throat. The world watched in horror as the terrorist leader issued his demands again. The victim pleaded for his life, his voice breaking. "Please, I have children." The video cut off abruptly, leaving millions sickened with dread. The president slammed his fist on the table when the video was shown in the Situation Room. "Enough," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "We cannot let them kill innocent Americans while we argue." He turned to his generals. "Prepare the operation. I want a plan on my desk within the hour." But preparation was easier said than done. Intelligence analysts pored over maps, satellite images, and blueprints of the compound. The layout was complex, filled with narrow corridors and reinforced walls. A frontal assault would be suicide. Negotiators, working through third-party channels, tried desperately to stall for time. The terrorists, however, were unmoved. Their clock kept ticking. As day turned to night, the families of the hostages filled hotel conference rooms set up by the State Department. Agents tried to offer reassurance, but the atmosphere was one of despair. Some cried openly. Others sat in stunned silence. A father whispered prayers into his clenched fists. A young boy clung to his grandmother, asking over and over when his mother would come home. There were no answers. The media only fanned the flames. Analysts spoke of another Tehran and a second Mogadishu, referencing past American crises. Opponents of the administration accused the president of weakness, while allies urged patience. Social media erupted with hashtags demanding action, each post carrying the weight of anger, fear, and hope. At the Pentagon, plans for Operation Iron Shield took shape. It was a nightmare mission, requiring coordination between ground forces, intelligence, and air support. The odds of success were slim. One commander muttered, "We're being asked to thread a needle in the middle of a hurricane." And then came the question of leadership. Who would command the skies? The operation needed a pilot with nerves of steel, precision unmatched, and the ability to guide soldiers through chaos. Several names were listed, but one kept surfacing: Captain Alexandra Hayes. Hayes was already a legend among pilots, though her career had not been without controversy. Some still doubted her ability, whispering that the mission was too dangerous to risk under her command. Yet those who had flown with her knew differently. They remembered the time she had flown into enemy fire to pull soldiers from ambushes, or when she had executed near-impossible maneuvers to save her wingmen. She was fearless in the air, steady in the storm. As generals debated, Hayes sat in the briefing room, silent, her eyes fixed on the screens showing the compound. She didn't speak until the debate turned to hesitation. Then she rose, her voice firm. "If you want them back alive, I'll lead from above. Give me the mission." Her words cut through the noise. The room fell silent. The president studied her for a long moment, weighing her resolve against the risk. Finally, he nodded. "Then it's yours." The decision was made. The mission was on. But outside the compound, the terrorists were tightening their grip. As midnight approached, hostages huddled together, whispering prayers into the darkness. The sound of boots on tile floors echoed like a drumbeat of doom. The deadline loomed closer, the world held its breath, and 200 lives waited on the edge of fate. For them, hope was fragile. For the United States, the window to act was closing. And for Captain Alexandra Hayes, destiny was calling her to the skies. Captain Alexandra Hayes sat in the corner of the operations room, her eyes fixed on the shifting images displayed across the digital monitors. The compound, the hostages, the armed terrorists pacing with their rifles, it was all laid bare in grainy drone footage. Around her, generals and analysts whispered in clusters, debating tactics and second-guessing outcomes. Hayes didn't speak. She didn't need to. She was already rehearsing the mission in her mind, charting flight paths, anticipating enemy fire, calculating risks with the precision of a surgeon. Hayes was no stranger to tension. She had grown up the daughter of a Navy mechanic in Norfolk, Virginia, listening to the roar of fighter jets overhead since childhood. While other kids plastered posters of pop stars on their bedroom walls, she taped up diagrams of F-16 cockpits. Teachers once told her that flying jets was a man's dream, but she ignored them, pursuing the dream relentlessly until it became her reality. Every obstacle, every dismissive smirk from male counterparts, only sharpened her resolve. She graduated top of her class at flight school, not because she wanted to prove them wrong, but because she refused to let herself fall short. Her career had been marked by boldness. In Afghanistan, she once flew into a sandstorm to provide cover for ground troops pinned down by insurgents, her visibility reduced to zero. Controllers begged her to pull back, but she pushed on, guided only by her instincts and training. The soldiers survived. Her commanders, though furious at her disregard for orders, couldn't deny her results. To her squadron, Hayes was more than a pilot, she was a lifeline, someone who would dive through hell if it meant bringing her people home. Yet despite her decorated record, doubt lingered in the upper echelons of command. She's reckless, some said. Too emotional. Too unorthodox. Others whispered the words she had grown accustomed to hearing. She's good, but she's a woman. This isn't the kind of mission you gamble on sentiment. Hayes heard it all, but it no longer stung. Instead, it fueled her. She had never asked for permission to be fearless. Now, as the hostage crisis spiraled toward catastrophe, her name kept resurfacing in mission planning sessions. If anyone can pull this off, it's Hayes, one colonel argued. She flies like the enemy can't touch her. Another countered, and what if she goes off script? What if her instincts cost us everything? Hayes finally broke her silence. Standing tall, her uniform crisp, her voice carried across the room. I know what you're all thinking, she said, scanning the faces of the skeptics. You're afraid this is too big, too risky, too fragile to hand over to someone like me. But let me tell you something. When I'm in the cockpit, there is no hesitation, no second guessing. I don't hear the noise. I only see the mission. And this mission is about 200 lives who don't have the luxury of your doubts. The room fell quiet. Even the skeptics had no immediate retort. There was something about her tone calm, measured, but edged with steel that demanded respect. When the meeting adjourned, the generals debated privately. Some argued she was the best chance they had. Others said choosing her was political suicide if the mission failed. But time was bleeding away, and no alternative shone brighter. Finally, the president himself made the call. She leads. That evening, Hayes walked onto the tarmac of the airbase, where her F-18 Hornet waited under floodlights. The aircraft gleamed like a predator poised to strike. She ran her hand along the fuselage, a ritual she always performed before missions. To her, the jet wasn't just a machine, it was an extension of her will, a blade forged in steel and speed. Her crew chief approached. "Ma'am, we've outfitted her with precision-guided munitions, extra fuel tanks, and the new electronic countermeasure pods. You'll be flying low, inside their kill zone. It's dangerous." Hayes gave him a small smile. "It's supposed to be." Later, she gathered the Special Forces team assigned to storm the compound. Hardened men with battle scars, they studied her with quiet skepticism. Some had never been led by a female combat pilot before. She knew what they were thinking. Could she keep her cool when their lives were in her hands? She addressed them directly, her gaze unwavering. "I won't sugarcoat this. The odds are stacked against us. But I've studied every angle, every rooftop, every blind corner. When you're on the ground, I'll be your eyes in the sky. My job is to make sure you get in, get them out, and come home alive. I don't care if it means flying into a wall of fire. I'll be there, always." The room remained silent for a moment. Then one of the soldiers, a broad-shouldered sergeant with a scar across his cheek, stood and nodded. "Then we'll follow you in, Captain." Trust, once tentative, began to take root. That night, in the solitude of her quarters, Hayes sat at her desk, pen hovering over a blank piece of paper. It was a letter, the kind soldiers wrote before missions they might not return from. She hesitated, then wrote simply, "If you're reading this, it means I did my job. Tell my family I never regretted a single choice." She folded the note, sealed it, and tucked it into her flight jacket. When dawn broke, the base stirred with urgency. Helicopters lined up on the tarmac, rotors thundering, while soldiers checked weapons with ritualistic focus. The desert air was cool, but the tension was suffocating. Hayes strapped into her flight suit, her helmet under her arm, her expression calm and unflinching. As she walked toward her jet, a junior pilot jogged up beside her. "Captain," he said, his voice anxious, "are you really sure about this?" "Everyone says it's impossible." Hayes stopped, looked at him, and replied with quiet certainty, "Impossible just means nobody's done it yet." Moments later, she climbed into the cockpit, the canopy lowering with a hiss. The instrument panels lit up, casting green and amber glows across her face. She tightened her grip on the control stick, listening to the hum of the engine building into a roar. The radio crackled. "Operation Iron Shield is go." Hayes's voice cut through the static, steady and resolute. "Iron Shield copies. Wheels up in 60 seconds." As the jet taxied toward the runway, the enormity of the mission hung in the air. 200 lives waited in the darkness of captivity. The world waited in suspense. And Alexandra Hayes, once underestimated, now carried the weight of history on her wings. The impossible rescue was about to begin. The air inside the command tent was thick with tension, the kind that settled like static before a storm. Maps and blueprints of the embassy compound stretched across tables, while satellite images projected onto screens showed every rooftop, window, and barricade. The clock ticked mercilessly in the corner, less than 15 hours before the terrorists' deadline expired. Hayes stood at the head of the table, flanked by generals, intelligence officers, and special forces commanders. The stakes had never been higher, and she knew every detail mattered. One wrong calculation could mean not only mission failure, but the deaths of 200 innocent people. The intelligence chief began the briefing, his voice clipped and precise. "The compound is rigged with multiple explosive charges perimeter walls, entryways, and the main hall where hostages are concentrated. We've identified at least 4 RPG nests, 5 heavy machine gun positions, and a dozen roaming patrols. The terrorists are organized, disciplined. They know what they're doing." Hayes leaned in, scanning the satellite photos. She could almost feel the weight of each blind spot, each shadowed corner where an ambush might lie. "If we go frontal, It's suicide, she said flatly. That's why we won't, replied Colonel Mitchell, the ground team's commander. He was a grizzled veteran of 2 decades in special operations, his face lined from years of desert campaigns. We'll breach from the east wall, under cover of night. Silent entry. The problem is, the eastern approach is exposed. We'll need you to draw their eyes somewhere else. Hayes nodded. Diversion. Not just any diversion, Mitchell continued. We need fireworks. Enough to convince them the attack is coming from the west, while we slip in from the other side. She studied the maps again. Her mind calculated angles, flight paths, weapon yields. It was dangerous, almost reckless, but possible. I can give you that. But the timing has to be perfect. Too early, and they'll adapt. Too late, and you'll be cut down before you breach. Mitchell met her gaze. Then it has to be perfect. The planning dragged into hours. Every scenario was dissected, every possibility war-gamed. Hayes and the Special Forces operators rehearsed their communication protocols until they could speak in shorthand, their sentences clipped but clear. Call signs were assigned, fallback positions marked, contingency plans laid. At one point, an intelligence analyst hesitated. Ma'am, with respect, the enemy has anti-air systems we can't fully account for. If you fly as low as you're suggesting, you'll be in their kill zone. Hayes didn't flinch. I'll be in their blind zone too. They can't hit what they can't see until it's too late. The analyst swallowed, unconvinced, but no one pressed further. Hayes's calm certainty carried more weight than theory. Meanwhile, across the ocean, families of the hostages held vigils. Churches lit candles, towns organized prayer circles, and strangers left flowers outside federal buildings. The entire nation seemed to lean forward, holding its collective breath. In the compound, the hostages whispered among themselves, clinging to hope despite their exhaustion. Some had lost consciousness from dehydration. Others stared blankly at the floor, their will fraying. But in quiet corners, they whispered rumors. The Americans are coming. They won't leave us here. Back at the base, the soldiers selected for the mission prepared in silence. They checked their weapons, loaded ammunition, and inspected each other's gear. Some muttered prayers, others joked nervously to mask the fear gnawing at them. The reality was stark. They might not return. One sergeant scribbled a final note to his wife on the back of a ration wrapper. Another tucked a photo of his children into his vest. Hayes moved among them, speaking little but offering nods of assurance. They weren't just soldiers to her. They were brothers and sisters in arms, bound by the mission. She knew their lives would depend on her decisions in the sky, and the weight of that knowledge pressed heavily on her shoulders. Later that evening, Colonel Mitchell gathered the team for the final briefing. Gentlemen, ladies, he began, his voice steady. This mission has been called impossible by everyone outside this room. They say it can't be done. That's fine. We'll prove them wrong. He paused, scanning the faces of his operators. We are the line between those hostages and their graves. We succeed, or they die. That's all you need to remember? Then he turned to Hayes. Captain Hayes will be our shield and our spear. She'll draw their fire, clear our path, and keep us alive from above. Trust her. Follow her lead. Do your jobs, and we all come home. The soldiers nodded, grim determination in their eyes. Trust wasn't given lightly in special operations, but Hayes had earned it. As night fell, Hayes walked once more to her jet. The air was cool, the runway shimmering under floodlights. She rested her hand on the fuselage, whispering under her breath, "Let's bring them home." The engines roared to life, shaking the ground as if the aircraft itself understood the gravity of what was coming. In the distance, helicopters prepared for liftoff, their rotors chopping the night air. Soldiers boarded in silence, faces painted black, rifles gripped tight. Colonel Mitchell's voice crackled over the comms. "This is Iron Shield Actual. All units, stand by for go." Hayes strapped into her cockpit, helmet visor sliding into place. The HUD lit up, painting the sky in symbols and trajectories. Her heart beat steadily, not with fear, but with focus. She glanced at the folded letter tucked into her pocket, the one she had written in case she didn't return. Then she pushed it from her mind. "Control, this is Valkyrie 1, she radioed, her call sign crisp. "Engines hot. Standing by." A pause, then the voice of command. "Valkyrie 1, you are cleared. Operation Iron Shield is a go. Bring them home." Her jet rolled forward, the runway stretching before her like a promise and a dare. The helicopters lifted behind her, shadows against the moonlit sky. 200 lives waited in silence for salvation, and every second mattered. As Hayes pulled back on the stick, her jet roared into the night sky. Below, the desert spread wide and dark, carrying the weight of destiny. The plan was set. The die was cast. Operation Iron Shield was underway. The desert night was cold, the air sharp with silence, broken only by the low thrum of helicopter rotors. Against the black horizon, the task force moved like shadows. Black Hawks skimmed just above the dunes, their lights off, their rotors muffled with sound-dampening modifications. Inside, soldiers sat shoulder to shoulder, rifles clutched to their chests, night vision goggles glowing faint green. No one spoke. The time for words had passed. High above them, Captain Alexandra Hayes cut through the sky in her F-16. Her call sign, Valkyrie 1, was steady in her ear as command updated her in clipped bursts. From her altitude, she could see the faint outline of the embassy compound, a jagged block of gray in the darkness, crawling with hostile heat signatures on her infrared display. "Valkyrie 1, Iron Shield Actual." Colonel Mitchell's voice crackled over the comms. "Ground teams are 5 minutes from breach. Begin diversion on my mark." "Copy that," Hayes replied, her voice steady though her pulse surged. She checked her instruments one last time. Weapon systems armed. Flares loaded. Countermeasures online. Her jet was a predator, waiting for the right moment to strike. On the ground, the Special Forces team reached their staging point. They crouched in the sand, eyes on the compound's eastern wall. Each soldier knew the drill: reach, clear, extract. But knowing didn't make the fear any smaller. One operator tapped his helmet twice their silent signal for courage. Another kissed the small cross hanging inside his vest. They were ready. Mitchell's voice came again. "Valkyrie 1. Now." Hayes pushed the throttle forward. Her jet screamed down from the sky, engines roaring as she streaked low across the western side of the compound. She fired a barrage of flares and dropped 2 precision bombs into a cluster of empty vehicles parked near the wall. The explosions tore through the night like thunder, flames climbing high into the air. Instantly, chaos erupted below. Terrorists scrambled to the western perimeter, shouting orders, weapons raised. Machine guns opened fire at the sky, tracers arcing wildly as they tried to track the fast-moving shadow of Hayes's jet. RPGs streaked upward, missing by hundreds of feet. Just as planned, their attention was fixed on her. "Diversion successful," Hayes reported. "All eyes on me." Mitchell's voice was sharp. "Copy. Breach team move." As Special Forces surged forward, engineers rushed the eastern wall, setting charges with practiced speed. The muffled thump of an explosion cracked open a hole, just large enough for a man to slip through. One by one, they poured inside, rifles up, night vision goggles scanning every shadow. Gunfire erupted almost immediately. A terrorist patrol rounded the corner, and was cut down in a hail of suppressed bullets. The operators pushed deeper, their movements fast and silent. Hayes circled back for another run, her hands steady on the controls. But her sensors lit up red multiple anti-air systems, locking onto her position. The enemy had been prepared for an air assault after all. "Command, I'm painting at least 3 SAM sites Lav," she reported. "They're tracking me. Can you shake them? Watch me." She banked hard, dropping to rooftop level, her jet slicing so low across the city blocks that laundry lines trembled in her wake. Missiles streaked after her, but she deployed countermeasures in bursts flares and chaff exploding in the darkness. The missiles veered, confused, detonating harmlessly in midair. Her jet rocked with the shockwave, but she held steady. On the ground, the gun battle intensified. The breach team split into 2 squads, one clearing the hallways, the other moving toward the main hall where most hostages were held. The corridors echoed with sharp bursts of suppressed fire, the metallic clatter of grenades, the shouts of dying men. Then came the first complication. Over comms, a soldier's voice shouted, "We've got civilians in the corridors, women and children outside the main hall. They're being used as shields." Mitchell cursed. "Secure them, carefully." But careful was difficult in the chaos. Terrorists shoved hostages forward, using them as cover while firing wildly. One operator took a round to the chest plate, knocked flat. Another returned fire, precise and deadly, dropping the gunman without harming the hostage. Hayes's voice cut through the comms. "Valkyrie 1 to ground team, watch your eastern flank. I'm reading multiple hostiles moving in your direction." Seconds later, terrorists tried to outflank the operators. Hayes swooped down, unleashing her cannon in controlled bursts. The ground shook as rounds tore through enemy positions, scattering fighters before they could close in. She bought them seconds, but seconds were gold. Inside the compound, Mitchell's squad finally reached the main hall. The sight froze them. Dozens of hostages huddled together, hands tied, eyes wide with terror. Around them, terrorists stood with rifles pressed to heads and chests. One man, clearly the leader, raised a detonator. "Back!" he shouted in broken English. One step closer, and they all die. The operators froze, rifles trained but unmoving. It was the standoff they had dreaded. Mitchell whispered into his mic, "Valkyrie 1, we've got explosives wired in here. Leader has the trigger." Hayes's heart clenched. From her cockpit, she couldn't see inside the hall. She was their hammer, but this was a scalpel's job. "What do you need?" she asked. Mitchell's reply was grim. "Time." Hayes roared her jet over the compound again, this time unleashing another barrage on the western side. The ground shook, glass shattered, and terrorists outside screamed in panic. Inside, the leader glanced upward for just a heartbeat too long. It was enough. An operator fired, his shot precise. The leader fell, the detonator clattering harmlessly to the floor. Chaos erupted, terrorists firing in every direction, hostages screaming, operators surging forward to shield them. "Hall secure." A voice shouted. "Hostages accounted for." Repeat. "Hostages accounted for." Relief surged through Hayes, but it was fleeting. Her radar lit up again, this time with more missile locks than before. "Command, they've reinforced anti-air. I'm not sure how many runs I can make before they clip me." "Stay alive, Valkyrie," Mitchell ordered. "We need you." Hayes gritted her teeth, banking hard as another missile screamed past her canopy. She was flying into the jaws of death, but she had no choice. Below, 200 lives depended on her keeping the sky under control. And on the ground, with hostages freed, but terrorists still pouring in from every corner, Mitchell's voice rang out over the comms. Phase 2 exfiltration. Everyone out, now. The battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. The embassy compound was no longer a fortress of terror. It was a battlefield. Smoke billowed from shattered walls. Flames licked at broken windows, and the air shook with gunfire. The hostages, still trembling, clung to the operators guiding them out. But the mission wasn't over. In truth, it had only reached its most dangerous stage: extraction. Colonel Mitchell's voice cut through the comms like a blade. Iron Shield teams, move? We've got a narrow window before reinforcements arrive. Get those civilians to the LZ. Operators formed protective shields around clusters of hostages, hustling them through corridors littered with spent shell casings and bodies. Every step was a risk. Every corner could hide death. Terrorists regrouped, desperate to reclaim their leverage. Bullets pinged off walls. Grenades rolled across tiles. Operators moved with brutal efficiency. One kicked a grenade back before it detonated. Another dove across a hallway to shove two civilians behind cover. Above, Hayes flew low, her jet howling like a predator through the night. Her radar warned of enemy locks, but she ignored the danger, focusing on keeping the ground clear. Valkyrie 1 engaging rooftop positions, she reported. Her cannon barked, shredding a machine gun nest seconds before it rained fire on the evacuees. Perfect timing, Valkyrie, a soldier shouted over comms. But the enemy wasn't broken. A convoy of Technical's pickup trucks, mounted with heavy guns, raced toward the eastern wall. Hayes caught them on her sensors. Command, multiple vehicles inbound east side. They'll cut off your exit in 3 minutes. Can you take them? Mitchell demanded. I'll try. She dove, locking onto the lead vehicle. Her missile screamed down, obliterating it in a fireball. The second swerved, but she strafed it with her cannon until it flipped, burning. The third truck opened fire on her, tracers streaking upward. She banked hard, flares dropping, then looped back to annihilate it with another missile. The convoy was gone. But now she was low on ammo, and the SAM systems were still active. On the ground, the operators burst out of the eastern breach into the open desert. The night air was cold, filled with the terrified sobs of civilians and the barked commands of soldiers. Black Hawks swooped in, rotors whipping sand into a frenzy. Pilots held their craft steady as evacuees scrambled aboard. But the terrorists were relentless. Mortar fire thudded into the desert, explosions tearing craters near the evac zone. One Black Hawk staggered as shrapnel ripped through its tail rotor. It spun, pilot fighting for control, then slammed into the sand in a plume of fire. Screams erupted. Man down, man down. Someone shouted. Mitchell gritted his teeth. Secure survivors. Everyone else, keep moving. Hayes saw the wreck from above, her stomach twisting. She wanted to dive lower, to shield them all, but she was already skimming dangerously close to anti-air fire. Her jet's warning alarms shrieked lock on. Missile inbound. She pulled the stick hard, twisting into a brutal corkscrew. The missile closed too fast, too smart. At the last second, she punched flares and yanked her jet through a suicidal dive between two buildings. The missile followed the heat signature, struck the side of a tower, and detonated. The blast wave rattled her cockpit, but she clawed upward, gasping for breath. On the ground, chaos thickened. One group of hostages panicked, breaking from the operator's formation. Terrorists opened fire, cutting them down. Sergeant Lopez, one of Mitchell's best men, sprinted into the open, dragging two bleeding civilians back with him as rounds chewed the sand around his boots. He collapsed behind cover, his vest riddled with impacts. Lopez is hit. A teammate shouted, but there was no time to stop. Mitchell forced his voice to stay calm. Keep moving. We leave no one behind, but we don't stop. Hayes roared back over the compound, releasing her last precision bomb on a mortar position that had been hammering the evac zone. The explosion silenced the threat, but it also signaled her reality. She was almost out of weapons. Only her cannon remained, and even that was low. The final groups of hostages loaded into helicopters, the rotors screaming. Operators pushed them forward, shielding them with their own bodies. One young soldier caught a round to the throat and fell instantly, but his sacrifice bought his civilians time to scramble aboard. Mitchell barked, "Iron Shield to all units, last bird is lifting in 2 minutes. Hayes, we need every ounce of cover you've got left." Hayes's reply came like steel. "Copy that? You'll have it." She flew so low, now she could see the flash of rifles on the ground. She squeezed the trigger, cannon fire stitching lines of destruction through advancing terrorists. Her jet skimmed over the compound, then banked sharply, looping back for another run. Alarm screamed against Sam Locke. She had no flares left. The missile fired. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Hayes's eyes locked on the streak of death, closing fast. She threw her jet into a roll, pulling G-forces that blackened the edges of her vision. The missile screamed past her left wing, detonating in the open desert. The shockwave rattled her teeth. Breathing hard, she steadied. Her body ached, her ammo count blinked near zero, but she wasn't finished. Not while hostages still waited to fly free. The final Black Hawk began to lift, loaded with the last civilians. Mitchell's team was climbing aboard when gunfire erupted from the rooftop. A terrorist with an RPG took aim at the helicopter's belly. Hayes saw it. She had seconds. She nosed down, cannon roaring, bullets shredding the rooftop and tearing the gunman apart before he could fire. The Black Hawk lifted, rotors spinning furiously, carrying its precious cargo into the night. "Last bird away," Mitchell confirmed. Relief washed over Hayes, but it was short-lived. Another missile warning blared, this one closer, faster, smarter. She yanked her jet upward, straining against the pull, but it wasn't enough. The missile clipped her right wing, exploding in a burst of fire. Her jet shuddered violently, alarms wailing. "Valkyrie 1 is hit," she shouted, fighting the controls. "Hayes, eject!" Mitchell yelled over comms. "No," she growled, wrestling the crippled aircraft. "Not yet. I've got one last run in me." Her jet burned, smoke trailing, but she forced it into one final dive. Unleashing her last cannon burst into a mass of pursuing terrorists. The rounds tore through them, scattering the survivors into the sand. Only then did she pull the eject handle. The canopy blasted open, and Hayes was thrown into the night sky, parachutes snapping open above her. Below, her jet slammed into the desert, erupting in a fireball. The last thing she heard in her headset before static cut off was Mitchell's voice, raw with urgency. "Valkyrie 1, hold on. We're coming for you." The desert wind bit at Alexandra Hayes's face as she drifted under her parachute. The darkness swallowed the landscape below, broken only by the flickering fire of her destroyed jet in the distance. She landed hard in the sand, rolling to absorb the impact. Her body screamed in protest, bruises and cuts stung, but there was no time to dwell. Every second she spent exposed brought the enemy closer. The radio crackled with static. "Valkyrie 1, report status." Mitchell's voice sounded strained but steady. Hayes gritted her teeth. She couldn't reply yet. The comms had picked up interference. Moving meant silence, and silence meant survival. She crouched behind a dune, scanning the horizon. In the distance, lights from the embassy compound flared briefly, a helicopter making rounds, likely checking for leftover threats. Her gut told her she had only a narrow window before enemy reinforcements arrived to hunt her. Hayes's training kicked in automatically. Every movement was deliberate, calculated. She dug into her pack, pulling out survival gear, a compact field knife, water rations, and a handheld GPS. Her mind raced, mapping escape routes, imagining patrol patterns, memorizing ridgelines and shadows. Above all, she thought of the hostages, now scattered in helicopters but not yet safe. Her failure here could jeopardize everything. In the distance, she spotted movement. 4 men on foot, armed, heading directly toward her crash site. Haze flattened into the sand, blending with the dunes. They hadn't detected her yet. Carefully, she monitored their approach, waiting for the perfect moment. When the men passed within 20 meters, Haze sprang into action. Using her knife, she silently incapacitated the first, dragging him into the shadows. The others reacted too late, startled by muffled grunts and the flash of movement. Within moments, she had neutralized all 4, hiding their bodies behind dunes. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from adrenaline and exhaustion. She had survived this long, but she couldn't afford hesitation now. Haze began moving east, crawling under the cover of night. Her jet's crash site glowed faintly behind her, and she forced herself to resist looking back. Every shadow could conceal a sniper. Every gust of wind could carry her scent. She pressed on, navigating by memory and GPS, every step deliberate, silent. Hours passed. She found herself in a shallow canyon, the walls towering on either side. Her muscles burned, and dehydration whispered at the edges of her mind, but she forced herself onward. A distant barking and shouting alerted her enemy patrols combing the area. Haze flattened herself against the rock, breath shallow, heart pounding. They passed, oblivious to her presence, but she knew it wouldn't be long before they returned with reinforcements. Haze's mind flashed to the hostages, still in danger. She had done everything possible from the air, risking her life to ensure their escape, but she knew the mission wasn't over until every one of them was safe. The thought steeled her resolve. She wouldn't let herself become another casualty. Not now. Not ever. Using night vision, she spotted an abandoned supply cache, partially buried in the sand. Inside, she found first aid supplies, a small ration pack, and a flare gun. It wasn't much, but it would keep her alive. She checked her comms again, still dead. Extraction teams were looking for her, but without a signal, she was on her own. The night dragged on. Patrols moved closer, searching systematically. Haze used her knowledge of combat evasion, rolling through sand depressions, avoiding ridgelines, and keeping to shadows. When a helicopter hovered overhead, she froze, letting the downwash mask her movement. Each encounter, each near discovery, reminded her that even the smallest mistake could end everything. By dawn, Haze had moved several kilometers from her crash site. Her legs ached, her throat parched, but she knew she had to keep going. Ahead, she saw a ridgeline she could use to survey the area. Climbing it slowly, she crested the rise and saw smoke rising in the distance, the last helicopters lifting the hostages to safety. Relief surged through her, but it was tempered by the sight of enemy reinforcements pouring into the desert from every road leading toward the crash site. Haze swallowed hard. She couldn't return to her jet. It was a beacon now. She needed another plan. Spotting a dry riverbed snaking through the terrain, she decided to move along it, hoping the canyon walls would provide cover from aerial surveillance. Hours passed in tense silence. The enemy scoured every dune, fired sporadically into the desert, and shouted orders to each other, convinced she was hiding somewhere close. Haze paused only to drink ration water and tend to a small cut on her arm. Every second she stayed alive, she thought, was another second the hostages remained safe. As night fell again, she found temporary refuge in the hollow of a rocky outcrop. Exhausted, she allowed herself a brief moment to breathe. Her mind replayed the mission, analyzing every move she had made, every close call. She realized the extraction wasn't over until she reached the safe zone. Suddenly, the comms crackled. "Valkyrie 1? Valkyrie 1, do you copy?" Hayes snapped upright. It was Mitchell's voice. "I read you," she whispered into the radio, careful to keep her tone low. "Coordinates for extraction have been set. UAVs are tracking your position. You've got a team moving in to link up. Can you hold until they arrive?" Hayes scanned the horizon. Enemy movements had slowed, likely a rotation shift, but reinforcements would return soon. "I can hold," she said. "Just get me out of here." "Hang tight." "You're not alone," Mitchell reassured her. Hours later, the rescue team arrived, a small armored convoy moving stealthily through the desert. Hayes moved to their rendezvous point, using every ounce of her training to avoid detection. Enemy patrols still searched, unaware that their most dangerous target was escaping beneath their noses. As she climbed into the armored vehicle, one of the soldiers looked at her, eyes wide. "Captain, you made it." Hayes allowed herself a small nod, though every muscle in her body screamed in exhaustion. She slumped into the seat, adrenaline finally ebbing. "We're not done yet," she said. "The hostages are safe, but the mission isn't over until everyone is out." Above, the desert sky remained dark, a silent witness to the courage, skill, and sacrifice that had brought her this far. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the wind cool her burned face, knowing that soon she would see the people she had risked everything to protect. The fight was almost over, but one final challenge remained. The first light of dawn stretched across the desert, painting the horizon in muted oranges and purples. Captain Alexandra Hayes and the armored rescue team moved cautiously along the rocky outcrop, ever alert to the patrols that still scoured the area. The night had tested them all, but the mission wasn't finished. The remaining hostages were en route in helicopters, and Hayes had to ensure their safe extraction while securing her own survival. Her comms crackled. "Valkyrie 1, UAV recon confirms multiple enemy units converging on your position. ETA for ground extraction team is 3 minutes. You'll need to hold them off." Hayes assessed the terrain. Open desert with sparse cover made a firefight inevitable. She activated her sidearm, moving to a position where she could suppress approaching enemies while the armored team readied defensive positions. Her training, her instincts, and her relentless focus now became a weapon as lethal as any missile or cannon. The enemy appeared in small groups, cautious but determined. Hayes fired in controlled bursts, picking off advancing soldiers before they could form a proper line of attack. Tracers crisscrossed the sand, and explosions erupted from grenades she flung expertly into flanking positions. Every shot, every movement was deliberate, every heartbeat synchronized with survival. From above, the UAVs relayed the location of the helicopters carrying the hostages. Hayes's mind raced. She had guided the operation from the skies, fought alongside operators on the ground, and now she had to coordinate one final, precise strike to ensure the escape went smoothly. "Hold position," she barked to the rescue team. "Do not let them flank us." Not a single step back. Minutes stretched like hours. The enemy pressed forward, but the armored convoy's firepower, combined with Hayes's marksmanship, created an impenetrable barrier. Then, in the distance, the sound of rotor blades cut through the desert air, a signal that the helicopters were approaching the extraction point. Mitchell's voice came through clearly. "Valkyrie 1, we see you. Cover fire on our coordinates for landing. You've got 60 seconds. Hayes adjusted her stance, firing with deadly accuracy at the advancing patrols. She watched the helicopters descend through the desert haze. Dust swirled violently, visibility dropping to mere meters. Operators ran, guiding hostages toward the landing zones while suppressing enemy fire. Suddenly, a sniper's shot rang out, hitting the armored vehicle. Sparks flew. The team ducked. Hayes responded instantly, scanning the horizon and returning fire with precision. Another round shredded a rock near her feet, sending shards into the air. The enemy was desperate, willing to risk everything to stop them. Almost there. Mitchell shouted, signaling for the last hostages to move. Hayes's eyes tracked the remaining civilians as they dashed across open ground, the sand tearing at their boots. Operators formed shields around them, absorbing enemy fire while Hayes provided cover. She pushed herself to move faster, firing her sidearm with skill honed from years of combat. One helicopter reached the landing zone, rotors whipping sand into a violent storm. Operators loaded the final hostages, while others provided suppressing fire. The moment was electric, tense, the line between life and death razor-thin. Hayes's pulse surged, but she didn't falter. Then, a group of terrorists attempted a last desperate assault, charging toward the helicopters with small arms blazing. Hayes reacted instinctively, firing and suppressing them with perfect accuracy. One operator fell briefly under heavy fire, but Hayes's cover kept him alive. Another grenade exploded near the landing zone, throwing sand and debris into the air. Hayes rolled, taking down 2 more attackers before they could regroup. The helicopters lifted, carrying the last hostages into the sky. Relief surged through Hayes, but she didn't let it break her focus. The enemy had one final trick, a hidden RPG team targeting the liftoff. Hayes calculated the trajectory instantly. She grabbed her rifle and fired, destroying the launcher before it could fire. The helicopter rose safely into the dawn. Hayes exhaled deeply, scanning the desert. The enemy was scattered, their assault broken. The mission, against all odds, had succeeded. 200 hostages were alive, the terrorists defeated or captured, and the operation had preserved the lives of every operator on the ground who had survived the deadly firefight. Minutes later, the extraction convoy returned for Hayes. She moved quickly, finally allowing herself to step away from the front line. Exhausted, battered, but alive, she climbed into the armored vehicle, her uniform streaked with dust and blood. Mitchell looked at her with awe and relief. "You made it," he said quietly. "We all did," Hayes replied. Her voice was steady, but inside, exhaustion mingled with triumph. Mission complete. The convoy moved toward the airbase, the first rays of sunlight illuminating the desert. Hayes looked out at the horizon, thinking of the hostages she had fought so hard to save, the soldiers she had watched risk everything, and the impossible odds they had overcome together. At the base, the hostages were reunited with medical teams and their families. Tears, hugs, and shouts of relief filled the air. President officials and high-ranking officers arrived, lauding the courage and skill displayed. News crews filmed, reporters capturing every moment of the miracle rescue. Hayes, however, remained quiet. She watched from a distance, her heart swelling not from pride, but from the sheer relief that every life had been saved. Soldiers who had survived the firefight approached, offering handshakes and quiet thanks. Hayes nodded to each, acknowledging the bravery and sacrifice of her team. Later, in a debriefing room, the president himself addressed the mission team. "Today, we witnessed courage, leadership, and heroism on a scale that will be remembered for decades," he said. "Captain Alexandra Hayes, you led from the skies and fought on the ground, risking everything to save your fellow Americans. Your bravery is beyond measure." Hayes listened quietly. She had never sought recognition. For her, the mission had always been about the lives at stake. But even as the accolades poured in, she felt the weight of what had transpired, the sacrifices, the fear, and the razor-thin margin that had separated life from death. That evening, Hayes walked alone on the airfield. The desert was calm now. peaceful in stark contrast to the chaos of the past 24 hours. She touched the fuselage of a waiting aircraft, remembering the roar of her F-16 and the fire she had faced in the sky. In her pocket, she kept the letter she had written before the mission words she had meant in case she didn't survive. She smiled faintly. The letter remained unopened, her life still hers. 200 lives had been saved. Heroes had emerged. And against impossible odds, the mission had succeeded. Hayes looked up at the sky, the first stars of night twinkling faintly, a reminder that hope could survive even in the darkest hours. She knew this would not be her last mission, but she also knew something profound. Courage, skill, and relentless focus could bend the impossible into reality. The desert wind stirred, carrying the echoes of helicopters, gunfire, and victory. Alexandra Hayes, the woman who had risked everything, finally allowed herself to breathe. The hostages were safe. The mission was complete. And the United States had witnessed a hero who soared above fear, uncertainty, and danger to bring its citizens home. For Hayes, the mission would forever remain a testament to the human spirit, the bond between soldiers, and the extraordinary courage it takes to face impossible odds and emerge victorious.